let's go back a year to when Pete Moralevich did the initial print for the museum gift shop. And I think when it came time again this winter, they started talking, and the word spread that they were looking for an illustrator. And I think between references from Pete and the museum, they reached out to me and, of course, asked if I was interested. And it's a great design project. In fact, it's right up my alley in terms of kind of my affinity for Fredericksburg, for the cemetery site itself. And as well, I think it had like a really neat kind of, I guess from my architectural background, just a really neat message of like, here's a place that you have to kind of capture in a drawing. And so, and the challenge, from there, the challenge was set. The conversation started back in March, and they said, by the end of April, you should have something, right, beginning of May. So from there, basically what I did is I started just generating ideas. And one of the first things I thought was, with Pete's great illustration from last year, from the 2022 print, I wanted to make sure that what I did kind of accompanied that in some respects. So we started to build like a set that looked good together. So that was one kind of parameter. And then from there, it, just like many other design projects, it starts with research, brainstorming. The museum shop provided me a really good kind of book that encapsulated the history of the cemetery. One of the park rangers also provided me with photos, historical photos to kind of take into consideration. And then from there on out, like every week I would visit the cemetery site and take photos, do some loose sketches, and start to kind of get some kind of concept. And as you can see from a lot of my early sketches, it's kind of funny how, initially, one of the things I thought, I was like, oh, I want to show just how dramatic the landscape is with the terraced kind of elevations. And also, of course, what makes the site so memorable is the different monuments. But then I backtracked a little bit, because after doing all these kind of generative sketches, I was like, it's about the Luminaria. It's about that night. So then I kind of backtracked a little bit, and I was like, well, these sketches are great. I'm digging in. I'm kind of gearing up for it now. What's most important? And then I just thought back to my own experience when my family and I went, I think it was 2017. But we took the whole family for the event, and what was most memorable was right around sunset. Bugler, they play taps every 30 minutes, right? So right around sunset, taps played, and this kind of hush fell on the whole crowd. And it was one of those moments where it's almost like you're time traveling. Right, everything kind of stops, and you begin to really show, feel some reverence for the site, and it kind of sinks in exactly what happened here in Fredericksburg, exactly what the cemetery is about in terms of the volume of soldiers buried there, and the I guess the candles, the luminarias, they really kind of bring that home, because you could visually see, the quantity, the vast quantity, all splayed out in basically like this perfect array around the whole cemetery, and that's really powerful. So the illustration is based off of that. And incidentally, one of the park rangers that I bumped into on my site visits, I just walked in the office and I said, do you have any stock photos from past events that I can reference? Because I was drawing the view, the perspective that you see, but I didn't have the luminarias. I didn't have the candles or the flags.
Yeah.
And I'm, kind of obsessive when it comes to it. I'm like, it has to be approximate. It has to be accurate.
Yeah.
Because if it's not, then, it just doesn't make sense to me. So fortunately, she had some reference photos, and one of them was really close to the area that I was looking at anyway. And I was like, this is perfect. I'll use that. I'll pull from that and then start to collage some of the other elements that I was already drawing. Like it would be the south-facing brick wall, as well as the flag and some of the tombstone monuments that you see at the top of the hill.
And to do it like you did at dusk, you've got to. You've got to get colors just right.
Right, and that was part of the struggle. In fact, that's when I was like, oh, this will just be like, I'm going to be me. I'm going to do my thing. It'll be collage. It'll be watercolor. It'll be mixed media, and that's fine for the generative sketches. But when it came down to it, I was like, I want to make sure that it prints well. Right?
Yeah.
Because that's another kind of technical aspect. So what I did was I started, from even generative sketches like this, I started, just digging into what my color palette could be. And then slowly, in fact, I went back. As I was kind of toiling on my computer, I was like, why don't you just go at sunset and take shots and then sample those and use those as your, the answer's there. You just have to go and kind of ask the questions. So, I went back to the site, took more photos, took more notes, and started to kind of compile it. So in some respects, the illustration is a little bit of a collage of many different site visits to the cemetery.
So it took a while. You
started
in the late winter.
Yep. I think it was sometime in I guess it would be mid to late March was the first conversation. And it does one of those things where it's like, as you approach the deadline, the temperature turns up. So for the first couple of weeks, I was kind of casually like, oh, it could be this, it could be this. In fact, I think this sketch is kind of funny because it's one of my earliest sketches of what it could be in terms of these striations of color, right? And especially using the flag or some other monument, as incorporated in the composition, and then it's one of those things where you have to go full circle around, even at one point I was like, what if there was even handwritten, verbiage that was embedded in the landscape, and if you look close, you can see, and I was like, whoa, that's cool.
Right. Yeah.
That's cool. However, once again, let's get back to the idea that it's a very specific point in time in the year, in that one night. So how can I kind of bring it back to that?
Well, the 2 years and Pete's from last year, they fit together so well.
Right.
Because his was at night.
Yep. And, kudos to Pete. And that's one of the challenges is as the follow-up, it's almost like you're doing a sequel to a movie, right? It's like this one has to be, at least it has to kind of match up to Pete's great illustration. How do you do that? And that was something that I took into consideration early on. If anything, I was like, this has to kind of be able to sister up to Pete's so that if a collector has Pete's and has mine, they pair together well. And that's really a neat kind of once again, a neat design parameter to have is you have to kind of make sure that you fall within the bounds so that as a set, and hopefully, going into the future with future artists, they all sort of, look great together, and begin to show different aspects of the event.
What an honor, like you say, somebody like you who's so connected to Fredericksburg.
Right.
This fits you perfectly.
Yeah, and in fact, years ago, I was like, there's going to come a time when a Fredericksburg themed art thing will happen, and if one site that I do want to do it with would be the cemetery. Once again, because of the neat contours of the terrain, and so this was a chance to dive into that. And I think even from a lot of the sketches that weren't used there, I'll probably return to them some point and develop them to kind of, be my own kind of interpretation of the cemetery as a whole, and that experience.
So you do what, 100? I've got number 8. You do 100?
Yep, there's 100 prints that we do, all, signed and numbered by me. And the idea is that it's a limited edition. They have, that kind of ups the ante in terms of their value, and makes them, special and kind of, once again, relative to the event span, the idea that it's released this week and you can pick it up for, for the event coming up this weekend.